these highlights because, whatever. But you can go watch the entirety of the last couple of minutes of the Georgia-Auburn game in 1986. When I tell you that the world was such a different place back then, we get so offended by everything now, rightly or wrongly. It just seems like that's the case. Back in 1986, and once again, I'm not condoning any of this. I'm just saying this is what was happening, and it was all being televised. And that's also kind of the weird part about this, too. It seems like now when the games go off the air, TV's darting to the next piece of programming in 5 seconds. But there's this footage of Georgia fans tearing up Jordan-Hare Stadium. Once again, I'm not condoning that. But they're tearing the place to pieces. And then the Auburn folks turn on these heavy-duty water hoses. And they're just blasting these Georgia fans with these water hoses. And you just realize, man, the SEC in the 80s was a lawless place. It's just the Wild West or the Wild Southeast, I guess. But it's just lawlessness. Georgia fans are tearing the place apart. The Auburn security's blasting them with water hoses. And all of it's being televised. And if this were to happen in 2021, I'm not even sure that I'd let my kids even watch it. It's it's pretty intense. It's kind of a chaotic scene. But back then, I remember the world's biggest deal, and there are T-shirts made, and everybody's talking about that. So one of the things we're going to do off the very top of the program today is talk about the recent history between both Georgia and Auburn. We're going to kind of get pretty deeply into all of that. But obviously, there is also deep, deep history going back over the years there as well. So that's really pretty fun stuff. JD, I'm glad that you brought that up. Jay Shipes also remember the 2007 blackout game. And I remember being there that day. And, I think what a lot of folks don't quite remember is that, and some of y'all have better memories than I do, but, correct me on this, I believe I'm right, that Georgia had attempted some sort of blackout of the Tennessee game the year before. Now, Georgia also lost that game in pretty embarrassing fashion. Tennessee, a fairly average Tennessee team, handled Georgia pretty good in 2006, unfortunately. But Georgia had kind of, hey, we're going to call this kind of a blackout game. And for the most part, people didn't really participate all that well. And so when I remember for the calling of the blackout, now we didn't know that Georgia was wearing the black jerseys, but I remember for the calling of the blackout, I was honestly curious about just how many Georgia fans would really participate in the blackout there that day. And that was one of the great things about that tailgate, going into that game. And back then I attended the game as a fan. I sat in the stands. I was dressed in black, head to toe. It was back in the November, I literally looked like Johnny Cash or something because I had the black pants on, the black Georgia shirt, and it was, November, so it was a little cooler. I had the black jacket on top of that. I was, just black dressed out from head to toe, like Phil Mickelson or something like that. The point here is it was so much fun to see how unanimous the participation was in all of that. And really, there was some wonderment about whether or not Georgia would actually wear the black jersey. This wasn't one of those things of, hey, Georgia's definitely wearing black jerseys, so everybody needs to wear black. No, everybody wore black because they were, calling for the blackout, and then the surprise came when the team, wore the jerseys. There was assumption that Georgia was going to do it, but it wasn't a unanimous thing. I remember the thing about that day that I always remember was the captains came out wearing red. And that was George was so committed to that gimmick that day of when the captains came out, they were wearing red, and you're like, oh, I guess they're not really wearing black jerseys. Then the team ran out in the black jerseys. Captains changed their jerseys, and on we went after that. It was a really pretty fun thing all the way around. A lot of history between these two programs, a lot of recent history there as well. Are we good to go on all the platforms? Were you good on Facebook today? Hey, Facebook folks, glad to have you back. Yesterday, we weren't impacted on this show, but the platform itself was down for a while yesterday. So appreciate all of that and really glad to have you with us. Connor Riley on the way, a lot of the crazy stuff happening around the SEC right now, a lot of criticism of some pretty high-profile coaches, and some better equipped to survive that maybe than others. So we'll cover all of that, but heavy on Georgia-Auburn off the top, the nature of the rivalry, a little bit of concern on the Auburn side about what Georgia may have in store for the Tigers here on Saturday, and the latest in the Georgia quarterback situation. Let's cover all those bases right now as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So I was telling our video audience a moment ago, and I'll say this to everybody who's just kind of tuned in now for the first time. If you're watching the show, you see in my hand here the helmet of Georgia's foe on Saturday. This, the Auburn Tigers, the renewal of the Deep South's oldest rivalry. This is here for a reason today, and we'll talk about why that is here in just a moment. Obviously, really, really excited about what's going to go down on Saturday. You kind of turn the page officially to Auburn here, and you can't help but think about the meaningful games these teams have played in recent years. Now, Georgia's won almost all of them, but still, the rivalry that was intense for 100 years has gotten more intense in recent seasons. And this is one of those things where I think if you're a Georgia fan, one of the things you're pretty grateful for is the fact that your head coach is a Georgia alumnus. And your head coach grew up in the state of Georgia. Your head coach has an understanding about the history of this rivalry. And if you put a microphone in Smart's face and say, hey, how big a rivalry is Auburn? Smart's going to say, well, they're all big. Every game is the same. That's the thing about being at Georgia. There's a lot of rivalries, and there's also SEC play, and we're trying to do blah, 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 get better each week. Like, he's going to say all of that. But that's not true because your actions speak so much louder than your words. And so Smart's words when asked about rivalry is all games are the same, respect every opponent, blah, 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 blah. But pretty clearly, based on Smart's own actions and behavior, there's a little extra juice in a game like this one. Florida will be the same way coming up in a couple of weeks. There's just a little bit of extra juice. Smart just knows how big the game is. He grew up learning about this, and now as a coach, his actions reflect all of that. And I think those of us who care deeply about Georgia football would say that this is a very good thing. In fact, let's kind of go back through this over the course of time here a little bit. Let's start with 2017 for a moment. Do you remember in 2017? Now, this was a bad day for Georgia, admittedly. Georgia goes into Jordan-Hare Stadium in November of that season, undefeated prior to that, and Auburn beat them up pretty good there that day. And this is one of those things where you just sort of have to take your hat off and give credit to your opponent. Auburn beat up Georgia pretty good once the game was done. And old Gus Malzahn, who was the coach of the Auburn Tigers at the time, he was really feeling himself a little bit after the game. Open mic caught him kind of giving himself a little boast, a little bit of a pat on the back. A lot of you remember this. Let's go back and hear the natural sound from after the game with Gus Malzahn celebrating that win against Georgia.
We whipped the dog crap out of them.
We whipped the dog crap out of them, he said there at the time, and that was a very big deal. And I remember after that 2017 loss for Georgia, Georgia knew it was going to be in the SEC championship game, and there was this hope. As crazy as it might seem, Auburn and Alabama playing that year, there was a lot of Georgia fans who were cheering for Auburn to win the game. Not because they wanted to avoid Alabama, but because they wanted to get Gus Malzahn back for all of that. They wanted to get Malzahn, some revenge on Malzahn for saying that he had whipped the dog crap out of Georgia way back in 2017. Now Smart wasn't having any of that. Smart, was very presidential. Smart was, very, very dignified and acting like whatever Gus Malzahn would have said was well beneath his status as a leader of men to get too worried about some of that kind of stuff. Here's Kirby from 2017.
I'll be honest with you. I think when you perform the way they did on the field, you earn the right to say really whatever you want. So I don't get into what Gus says, and he probably doesn't get into what I say.
Do you believe that for a second? Do you believe that for a second that Kirby Smart didn't care that Gus Malzahn was strutting around Jordan-Hare Stadium field after that game back in 2017 saying we beat the dog crap out of them? Of course Kirby cared. And we know how this goes. We've had people tell this before. Smart himself may not be the one stirring the pot about that, but you better believe that the Georgia strength and conditioning staff is going to be doing that. The guys who were here back then, the ones, some of them are still here obviously now, including Scott Sinclair. You better believe they were stirring the pot with all that. We know for a fact that after the game in which Georgia got revenge, we called it DawgNation Retaliation at the time. I still wear the T-shirt, the DawgNation Retaliation T-shirt. Remember Isaac Nott on the field after that game saying, hey, well, now we beat the dog crap out of them. So pretty clearly this was on the Georgia players' minds and had been stirred up a little bit regardless of what Kirby Smart had said. But it established what would be in the remainder of the Malzahn era and what's continuing now to this day, a big rivalry between the two programs. In fact, I'll play you a couple of seconds here worth of Kirby Smart in no uncertain terms how he thinks the way that Auburn thinks about Georgia. This is Smart very clearly on the emotions in a game like this from 2018.
When it comes to Auburn, you know how that goes. I mean, they don't like us, and we get it.
He says they don't like us, and we get it. And I think the Auburn side would say, yeah, well, Georgia doesn't like Auburn very much either. Because remember, 2018, this is the year after dog crap and the DawgNation retaliation in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Now it's back home in Athens. Georgia's got the big one. Is it 17-point lead? And then late in the game with that big lead, Georgia's trying a field goal, then fakes the field goal and tries to score a touchdown with a commanding lead already in place. Now, the fake doesn't work here in this regard, but that's what Georgia was trying to do. And after the game, then Auburn coach Gus Malzahn, boy, he was so mad about that, and he kind of expresses in kind of a passive-aggressive way, but he was really mad about all of this. Let's go back to 2018 for a moment and remind you another chapter in this recent history of the Georgia-Auburn rivalry.
What are your thoughts on Georgia faking the field goal when they were up 17 and the game was in hand?
They coach their team and we coach ours. I don't have any comment on that.
There's nothing better than a well-placed coach's no comment during a press conference, because usually that silence speaks a bunch of words, and boy, you can just hear the disgust in Malzahn's voice, because now he's lost to Georgia 2 consecutive games, going back to December of 2017. Now the Georgia program is kind of getting off and running, leaving Malzahn in the dust. Eventually, Kirby would be one of the chief reasons that Gus Malzahn would get fired, and Kirby's also rubbing Malzahn's face in it at the end of that game there in 2018. Now, for what it's worth, once again, Kirby kind of took the high road back in 2018, acting like there was a strategic reason for faking the field goal and not simply a chance to spike the football against one of his hated rivals, this Kirby from 2018.
Why the fake field goal in the last few minutes?
Why not?
Because you had a comfortable lead.
Comfortable? What was comfortable? 17? 17 plus 3 is what? 20? And 20 is a what? 3-score game you lose, right? So if the point differential is 3 scores, what good does a field goal do you? Doesn't make it anymore. So if they don't get it, they're backed up, right? So the thought was they're going to take 3 touchdowns to beat us if we get that. If we don't, 3 touchdowns is going to beat us right away. So it's all about point differential and decisions, and we wanted them to have to start backed up. So it was something that was well thought out long before it happened. It was talked about during the drive.
So it's all about point differential. It's all about decisions. It's all about point differential. It's not about trying to rub the face of your rival in the turf there at the big lead. It's about point differential, which is, Kirby Smart's prerogative to say it that way. But once again, another great chapter in what happened with these two teams. Now, I could also talk about last season, 2020, with the idea that they're the most talented team in the SEC, and Smart getting very upset about Malzahn saying that, and essentially kind of rolling his eyes at all that. But I'm not even going to talk about the 2020 stuff that happened between these two teams in the last meeting ever between Malzahn and Smart. Let's go to 2019 for a moment. Once again, if you want to have an idea about how Smart views the Georgia-Auburn rivalry, how all of this feels to him, go back to there that day. Hard-fought victory for Georgia against a pretty good Auburn team. Crowd got really loud and into the game there late. Georgia did in 2019, as it had done in 2002, which clinched the SEC East right there on the turf there at Jordan-Hare Stadium. And then after the game, Smart was asked what he told his team upon getting that victory. Now, this is a family show, so we are editing this clip for content, but you still get a little bit of a sense of just how much beating Auburn meant to Smart back in November of 2019. This is him relaying his message to the players in the locker room after that game. Classic Kirby and a classic moment in the Deep South's oldest rivalry.
I don't think so. I don't even think I said anything about it. I mean, I gave credit to Auburn and told our guys to handle it with you the right way. So how about the dog? That's what I told them. That's my language. I didn't say anything about the SEC because that wasn't the goal coming in here. You know what I mean? The goal for us was to continue to get better.
So Smart says, I told them HBTFD, and you can obviously think to yourself what the HBTFD means and the expletive that we had to bleep out there, but Smart speaking from the heart, because my guess is Kirby Smart really enjoys beating Auburn. Now, if we've noticed that here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, the folks on the Plains apparently have noticed this there as well. There is a veteran Auburn reporter. His name is Philip Marshall. He writes for 247sports.com, and looking ahead to the game on Saturday between Georgia and Auburn, Marshall's, I think, speaking the language of Auburn fans here, seems to have a little bit of a concern. Now, I just told you, 2017, what happened? 2018, what happened? 2019, what happened? There was more fireworks from these two teams in 2020. The rivalry credentials well established. Here's what Philip Marshall, the Auburn reporter for 24/7 Sports, says all of that could mean for Saturday's game. Can we show this on the screen here for a moment? So here's what Marshall says one of his big concerns is, or maybe Auburn fans, what their big concern for Saturday will be. Will Kirby Smart run it up on Auburn if he gets the opportunity? Marshall says at 24/7 Sports, I believe he will. Smart has made his dislike for Auburn clear. That, an Auburn reporter writing for 247sports.com saying, oh boy, if there's the chance to tack on the extra score, this isn't Sam Pittman you're playing anymore. This isn't beloved former assistant and team in Arkansas I've got some respect for. This is the hated Auburn Tigers. This is have a chance to tack one on late to kind of show where Georgia ranks in the national pecking order in a hostile stadium, a school that Kirby kind of views as a very big rival. Maybe Georgia does want to run the score up on Saturday. Now, listen, obviously all that really matters is getting the win, but Georgia fans are also going to allow themselves to be greedy here for a little bit. So let me join Philip Marshall in saying I am also curious to see if Georgia on Saturday puts its foot on the gas, if Georgia on Saturday tries to tack on that extra score. Would Georgia fans like to blow out Auburn this upcoming weekend? You better believe they would. And with that in mind, I told you on video a moment ago, got the Auburn helmet right here. And as a way of just kind of reminding all of us what this Georgia-Auburn rivalry has been, let me go back to that past here for a moment. I was given a few of these bumper stickers a few years ago. And so let me kind of pull one of these out right now. A chance to kind of stick this on here, and let's see if we can get this to come off. This thing's been sitting there since 2019. Let's see if we can pull this apart. Yeah, now we got it. So this is one of those HBTFD bumper stickers. I was given a bunch of these way back in 2019. See that right there? You know what that stands for. You heard that from Kirby Smart a moment ago. I'm going to take this HBTFD bumper sticker. I'm going to smack this thing right here on the side of this Auburn football helmet, because I think the idea of, hey, blowout against Auburn on Saturday, keeping this hated rivalry in mind, keeping the fact those Auburn folks are pretty scared of the Georgia Bulldogs, I like the idea of all that right there. So how about a good reminder of what Saturday's all about? That's it for you right there. HBTFD going to Jordan-Hare Stadium. They are worried about a blowout. They are worried about the behemoth that is the Georgia Bulldogs right now. And I think most Georgia fans would say, yeah, with pretty good reason. There is a lot of history between these two programs. And when Auburn's been fortunate enough to beat Georgia, they have talked, they have crowed, they have strutted, Gus Malzahn, dog crap, what you and your own neighborhood have had to experience, maybe some of the Auburn fans that you've lived with. But it is a dawning of a new age right now. And Georgia's got a big-time team coming in there on Saturday. So HBTFD, that is that's plenty good as a motivation for the Dogs on Saturday. And I can't wait to see how all of that plays out. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. By the way, great to have Facebook back from the dead again after what was a little bit of a rough day yesterday, not affecting our show, but glad to know it's kind of back in time for our show here today. And, of course, a lot of you join us at 9:45 at DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app for our First and 15. Fun to have all of you with us there for that. Podcast, radio, 963 Rev, everything else in between. Just really appreciate you being here. And, of course, a big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. It is raining like crazy today. That's why I've got kind of like the waterproof pullover on today, because it was pouring down rain as I was coming in. And for a lot of you, the rain means trouble, right? You see the water creeping into your garage, obviously kind of overtakes your crawl space in your basement, a place that you definitely don't want that to be. And it's time to get that fixed. And maybe you've put off making the decision. Don't put it off anymore. Or if you're seeing those foundation issues showing up, cracks, that's the easiest way to recognize that in your foundation floor and the walls, those horizontal cracks, vertical cracks, just those cracks can be obviously a sign of trouble. We'll get that seen about too. My friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, they do great work with this. They have 2 full-time engineers on staff. That means that they got smart people handling serious issues. No more important asset for you than your home, and Engineered Solutions of Georgia is there to help protect all of that and take care of what can be one of the most substantial issues you're ever going to deal with. They are also proud partners of UGA, makes them fun to do business with, longtime friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily, and we love like crazy those that support those that have supported DawgNation Daily for a long time. And, of course, Engineered Solutions of Georgia is certainly an example of that. They're also really easy to get in touch with. You can give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now, and they can provide you a solution for your foundation waterproofing issues. They got solutions in their name. They solve big-time problems when it comes to foundation waterproofing issues. So check out ESOG today. All right, speaking of things going on with the Georgia Bulldogs, we'll get Connor Riley coming up in a moment. We'll do a Kroger Fresh Take with him and get all kinds of information on kind of what's going on at UGA practice, the look ahead to Auburn, clearly the intensity of the rivalry, but also an important next step for Georgia along the way to, just keeping pace from a resume standpoint with, what the top teams in the country are supposed to be able to do. Another comparison Saturday coming up, and how does Georgia get ready to do that against Auburn on Saturday? We'll talk a lot about that here before we're done getting ready for the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Before that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union. Always happy to have them as a part of the program. And I do want to get serious for them. We had some fun off the top with the rivalry and the recent history here and the fact the Auburn folks a little worried about a blowout coming on Saturday, a little concerned about all of that. But let's get serious here for a moment, because there was a pretty important update from Kirby Smart given about the status of JT Daniels. And sometimes we might get frustrated that Smart's not being clear enough or saying one thing, meaning something else, and I've been guilty of that. Maybe I've also been guilty of reading too much into what Smart has said in the past. Obviously, these injuries matter. Coach is going to work hard to make sure the message is controlled exactly the way they want it to be, and you understand all of that. But I thought yesterday, I don't think you can say that Smart didn't give a clear message. I don't think that you can say that Smart's message was difficult to interpret. So if you kind of know where exactly things stand with JT Daniels, I thought Smart yesterday was about as clear on this topic as he has been. No game seemingly being played with all of this. And, if you're a Georgia fan that just kind of wants to know what the situation is, I think you have to say you kind of got that from Kirby on JT yesterday. Here's a very clear statement about Daniel's status after not playing against Arkansas. Here's Kirby.
As far as JT, he's not going to do anything today. He'll be out. He's practicing. He's doing everything but throwing, and then we'll see how it goes, day to day. The biggest thing is he's got to rest and recover and try to heal. So we're very hopeful that he'll be able to go Tuesday, Wednesday, and be able to throw, and like he was able to do last week some days. But he's not going to do much today in terms of throwing. But there's a lot more to quarterback than just throwing the ball, and he does a lot of that stuff well, and he'll still do all those things today.
I understand what Smart's saying there at the end. I think the presence of a quarterback matters, whether he's participating or not. It's one of the reasons why Georgia a lot of times will travel 4 quarterbacks to these away games, is because either they're going to absorb something or they're going to be a source of absorption for somebody else. And I think JT Daniels, as the obvious starter for Georgia when healthy, his presence in practice, doing whatever, I'm trying very hard not to use the phrase mental rep here, because that's one of the things that people used to mock Butch Jones for. But, there is a mental rep part of this of, hey, if you're thinking about what needs to be done in every situation, you are a participant in practice, even if you're not doing the physical part of it. But clearly it's the physical part of this that matters more than anything else. And we kind of openly speculated yesterday, and hopefully not recklessly so, but openly speculated of, if a little bit of rest is going to make Daniels healthier, then just give it to him. If you really got this much faith in Stetson Bennett, and I take Smart seriously when he says that he does, if you really obviously have as much faith in your defense as you do, and you should, gosh knows how well that's playing. Georgia running game coming on right now too. Auburn's cowering in the corner about the idea of being blown out as it is. If all of this is true, then take the bold step of resting JT Daniels. Don't practice him at all, and just let him rest and let him get healthier, in the hope that, hey, maybe by the time you get now towards the month of November, now he's even healthier. And like I said before, that's all just speculation. That's all just kind of thinking out loud. But it is one of the things that kind of comes to mind through all of this. But I think it's also important to add this to the discussion. When Smart talks there about what Daniels will do at practice and how available he is, and the fact that he's not throwing right now, I think you got to take that pretty seriously. And as a way of kind of refining that point, let me bring in something else that Smart said yesterday. This is about a different play. This is about Tyke Smith, who is trying to work his way back and be a part of what's happening there defensively. And maybe that's going a little slower right now than Tyke kind of wants it to. But in speaking about Tyke yesterday, Smart made kind of a bold, sweeping statement about his team overall, and I think you have to take this pretty seriously when it comes to JT Daniels. So, context here. We just heard Smart say, right now, Daniels is participating in practice. There's a lot of things you can do besides throwing, but on Monday was not going to throw. And when reporters, including our own Mike Griffith, got a chance to see that yesterday, they saw that with their own eyes. So Daniels limited in practice, apparently not doing the physical stuff that a quarterback needs to do. So that was the situation with Daniels. Now here's Kirby talking about Tyke Smith, but listen to the phrase that Smart uses when it comes to players on his team. I think if this applies to Tyke, it also applies to JT Daniels there as well. Here's Kirby again.
I mean, you got to practice to play. One thing we don't do here is when you don't practice, you can't play. So Tyke was at practice, and he tried to go in practice. It's tougher on him with the movements he has to have. He's reacting to movement as opposed to going in a direction, so it's different for him.
So Smart says you got to practice to play. That if you want to be on the football field, we're not going to play you on Saturday if you're not practicing during the week. Now, that's obviously important for Tyke Smith, and obviously we'll focus a lot on how eventually Smith kind of gets back here with the Dogs and doing everything was expected of him at some point in time. But let's use that same phrase relevant for JT Daniels here for a moment too. That if Daniels is going to be the quarterback for Georgia on Saturday, he has to be, you would presume, on the basis of those words right there, he's got to be available to Georgia during the week as well. Now, most of you know this, but I'm going to say it out loud anyway. Like when Smart says you got to practice to play, I don't think he means that in any kind of punitive sense. This is not one of those things of if you're not going to be healthy enough to practice, we're therefore going to punish you on Saturday by not allowing you to play. That's not what Smart means by that. I think what Smart means by that is if you don't practice, your ability to be effective on Saturday is just going to be different. If the NFL, we'd be having a completely different conversation, right? You're talking about 30-something-year-old guys or, late 20s. You're talking about guys that have been at the professional level for quite some time. I mean, you think about, like, for Falcons fans for years, Julio Jones seemed to never practice. That didn't seem to have any kind of impact on him because he's kind of an old dude by that point in time. He's fully, grown man, full-fledged professional. College guys are not that. Even someone like JT Daniels, who's cerebral and understands the game and, kind of all those complimentary things you'd say about his cognition, his ability to kind of function with the mental part of football. Still, this is a younger guy. This is a guy who's, getting used to life as the Georgia quarterback. He's only started a small handful of games with the Bulldogs over the course of the last couple of seasons. That if Daniels is not available to practice, then the idea that he's the best option for Georgia on Saturdays, that honestly just might not be true. That working hands-on with the game plan against a very good Georgia defense in those moments during practice is probably a really good way to make sure you are fully prepared for what's going to happen on Saturday. And if you're not able to do that, then that may be as much as any reason, if you had to kind of think out loud here for a moment, that may be as much as any reason why you might not see Daniels against Auburn on Saturday and maybe in other games, at least another game after that there as well. So I think that everything that Smart says matters. I think everything he says for a reason. And when he says about Tyke Smith that you've got to be able to practice to be able to play, I think that's the kind of pull-out quote that is probably relevant for the rest of the team there too. Not because you're punishing players, but because to get the best out of players, you got to have a good week of practice there also. So, that was the story for Monday. JT Daniels wasn't throwing. Is he healthy enough to do that today? We typically think of Tuesday as a pretty important practice. Obviously, we'll be listening very closely to see everything that Smart says, other Georgia players say, the reports that kind of come out of all of this. We're going to be watching all of this closely, but the practice time for Daniels as important as anything in terms of demonstrating how healthy he is and how capable he is of managing that pain tolerance, as Smart has talked about, and leading the Georgia offense. Eventually, you need to have him back. Maybe you have the luxury right now of letting that process play out slowly, but this will be one of those things that Georgia fans are monitoring very, very closely. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union, and I obviously love what Georgia's Own Credit Union has been doing for its members for a long time. And obviously, one of the most important things you can get from Georgia's Own Credit Union is access to one of these Visa, Signature, and Platinum cards. These are cards that have all kinds of conveniences and all kinds of great options for you there as well. On the subject of conveniences, you can get contactless payments, which obviously makes things really, really nice. You can also get all kinds of flex rewards, which you can really use for just about anything. I'm talking about gift cards, travel, cashback, merchandise. Plus, as a bonus, you can also earn up to $150 when you open one of these new Platinum or Signature cards. There are some restrictions that apply, so make sure you check out the website, georgiasown.org, for a lot more information on this. georgiasown.org. And, of course, it's great to have Georgia's Own Credit Union as part of Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily here today. A bunch of stuff around the SEC we've got to cover before the show is done. But, man, it's time to get deep into Georgia-Auburn on Saturday. Still a little weird to have this game in October, but a lot of fun nonetheless to be getting ready for the Deep South's oldest rivalries. Let's do all of that right now as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley. Good to have all of you with us, too.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, so Connor Riley here, Kroger Fresh Take, getting ready for Georgia and Auburn coming up on Saturday. Man, that's always so much fun and so much to be said about that game as we cover all that with Connor Riley right now. Connor, I guess let's begin where I just was. Do you take the practice stuff as seriously as I do right now, that even though we think of Daniels as kind of a student of the game, and clearly when Daniels plays, he's effective, but I do think your practice week is a big key to your effectiveness. And it's not one of those things of, well, the pain was flaring up on Tuesday, and so he couldn't practice, but now he feels better on Saturday, so you're just going to kind of throw him right out there and let him go out there and be your guy. My guess is that probably puts Todd Monken and Kirby Smart in a little bit of an uncomfortable position, that as good as Daniels is, you don't get the best of him if he's not capable of practicing during the week. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, Kirby is I think a stickler for going out there and practicing and performing well in practice. I think that's a big way that players earn trust with Kirby, so that he does feel comfortable putting you out there on Saturdays. And with JT's injury, it's clearly just a rest thing. You know, Dak Prescott, who is tearing up for the Dallas Cowboys right now, as Kirby Smart has pointed out, missed pretty much close to a month of preseason practices because he had a similar lat strain. Now, Kirby has said that the strain that Prescott had was more severe. And so if, you know, JT's been dealing with this for a week and a half per Kirby since they've diagnosed it. Maybe another week and a half until he is sort of back to where he's able to capably throw again. I mean, not to armchair doctor this, but you and I saw JT on the field on Saturday. Yeah. He did not look comfortable throwing. He did not. Even the limited throws that he was making, he just did not seem very comfortable right there. So, you know, it's something that's clearly they're just going to have to rest and sort of take this practice by practice now at this point and see where he's at physically and if he's able to go.
Yeah, this is such a risky thing to do, but when you go back and think about body language before the UAB game, I think that Daniel's body language that day made it seem like he might start, right?
Yeah.
There was a little bit of mystery of, what's going on here? How's this going to play out? There was no mystery whatsoever.
Very early on, it was clear he was not going to play.
Anybody who was in the stadium and watching this unfold could have seen this. It was just a guy that I don't want to describe it too much because you end up reading too much into it, but there was just a certain just resignation that he just wasn't going to be playing there that day. And to repeat to you what I said to the rest of the audience a moment ago, this is not punishment. This is not, okay, you're not practicing, therefore we're not playing you. Like, Daniels wants to practice. I mean, this is not one of those things of, you know, I'm a hard driving coach and I drive a tough ship here, and if you're not, you know, we're going to punish you if you don't go out there and practice. I really do think when it comes to these complicated game plans against these SEC defenses, that your rhythm in executing all of this is developed during practice. Gosh knows the value of going up against the Georgia defense is clearly a way that you can, you know, develop some precision with all of that. The other players need to practice with the quarterback they're going to be playing with. There's also this leadership, you know, kind of intangible quotient involved with this too, where you want that team to rally around that guy. It's not about we're going to punish if you don't practice. It's you're just less valuable to us if you can't practice.
Yeah, Kirby said it himself. He's frustrated by what he's having to deal with right now. His body is not helping him succeed, and for him to succeed, he's also got to go through practice for Georgia. Continue to develop that chemistry with these wide receivers who are still pretty banged up, and is still a pretty rotating cast in every week of who's healthy and who's not. And I think that's really developed over the course of practice. And until we see JT consistently practice or you know, consistently at this point maybe not practice, maybe that's a better indication of when we might expect to see him back, as opposed to this seemingly every week now. It's Wednesday, Thursday. Is JT going to play? Is he not going to play?
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like we've had way too many opportunities to talk about this kind of stuff over the course of, you know, this season, even going back into the summer. But you know, if Daniels is out there, but he can't comfortably make every throw, then he is less valuable than Stetson Bennett. Like, Daniels is the A player, he's the starter. Bennett's the B player, he's the backup. But if Bennett is fully healthy and fully capable of making all the throws to the best of his ability, which his abilities are limited compared to JT Daniels, but if Bennett is healthier and more easily able to the best of his ability to make the throws that he can make, And that's more valuable than JT Daniels at only 85% or whatever else, because a Daniels that can't make all the throws is not JT Daniels.
No, because he's not the athlete that Stetson Bennett is. He's not moving around in the pocket with the same ability that Stetson Bennett has. And so if you're already sort of limited athletically in how you're able to move around and create plays there, and now you're physically unable to make the throws that make you such a great quarterback, at a certain point, I think like we sort of saw in the Clemson game, looking back at it now, I don't want to say JT Daniels was hurting Georgia that day, but because of the ailment that he had, the oblique at that point in time, the Georgia offense was severely limited in what it could do. And if that's the guy you're throwing out there, you're handicapping your own offense in that point in time. And so while, yes, Stetson Bennett has his limitations, he's also done some really good things for this Georgia offense as well.
Yeah, so this is an unfair question to ask you because neither one of us have the expertise to answer it, but I want to ask it anyway. Do you think it's possible that at some point in time this season, November, December, Lord willing, January, do you think it's possible that we're no longer talking about JT Daniels' lat, oblique, some sort of muscle injury that could potentially limit him? Is there a foreseeable scenario where this is overcome at some point?
God, I hope so. I do think there's a chance. Again, this is maybe just following one example a little too closely, but nobody's talking about Dak Prescott's lat right now. And so, if Daniels is able to get the rest that he needs and is able to sort of get this back to where he feels comfortable throwing the football consistently, maybe that's where we're at with this. Because it doesn't sound like the oblique is the issue anymore. It sounds like now the lat has become the chief problem when it comes to JT Daniels and his health.
And I guess the reason why I link them together, because I just think of them as similar type deals, muscles that create, comfort in throwing it. So if it was you, would you shut him down for the next 2 weeks?
That's tough. I'd shut him down for Auburn, and we'll get into why coming up shortly. Mm-hmm. If he's able to play for Kentucky and he feels good, I would play him against Kentucky because I think Kentucky has a better chance of muddying up that game and making it look kind of ugly. And we saw them do that last year to Stetson Bennett. But I also wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if we don't see JT Daniels until the Florida game again.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, and we'll get more deeply in the Auburn game for a moment, but you think about right now, Georgia's riding high. There's a lot of rat poison. I'm not quite so sure that Kirby Smart wouldn't mind a couple of weeks of what's wrong with Georgia if they're struggling a little bit but also winning. I'm not quite so sure if Kirby Smart wouldn't mind that a little bit.
Can we retire rat poison? Kirby in his press conference outright yesterday had a chance to use the whole rat poison thing that Nick Saban coined and Nick Saban has used time and time again. He didn't use rat poison. He just came out and outright said poison. Said that national media, saying nice things about our defense after complaining on Saturday that people weren't asking enough nice questions about what this Georgia team did well. Said, we got to be aware of the poison that is out there. I think now this Georgia fan base, given all the complaints that Alabama fans have about copying Alabama, doing this, that, and the other with Alabama, let's just agree not to use the term rat poison.
But hold on, this is not Georgia copying this, although Georgia would be the team that most likely would be receiving rat poison right now. This is one of those things just sort of belongs in the lexicon. Like it's actually one of the most fascinating things to me to watch how quickly this became a phrase that needed no explanation whatsoever. I mean, I can say this. I've probably used rat poison in a headline a few times over the course of the last few years without really any concern whatsoever that people would not know what I'm talking about. Now, I get your point. Maybe it's moving into like cliche territory. It's just amazing how quickly this went from being I think that Saban said that got a bunch of attention to overnight. It just became the word that it's used to describe, unwelcome praise.
I'm going to make it my mission to get rat poison out of the cultural lexicon.
I do like the fact that for Smart now it's just poison.
It's just poison.
Like it's so common now that we've now shortened it a little bit even more. Well, I guess let's do a little bit more poison here for a moment because you were telling me off the air yesterday that you have a pretty bold prediction to make about the Georgia-Auburn game for Saturday, which I find to be pretty fascinating. And, boy, if this comes true, talk about buckle your seatbelt, this would be on.
So we all know the Georgia defense is great. There's no denying that. But when you hear people give score predictions all the time, almost no one ever says, they're going to score 0 points. They're not going to score at all. Auburn is going to score 0 points on Saturday.
That's a big prediction. That's a big prediction.
And while, yes, last week my bold prediction, Zamir White would have 100 yards. While I can't claim the win there, he also did have 3 touchdowns in that game.
Right. That's right.
Auburn is going to score 0 points this week. Bo Nix played great last week. I've been critical of him in the past. He did everything that was needed to for that Auburn team, a team that didn't run the ball that well against against LSU. Nix was actually Auburn's leading rusher in that game. Auburn is not going to score a single point on Saturday.
Yeah, I just think that's a huge prediction. And, look, I want to give Auburn a little bit of credit because I did think what they did on the road at LSU Saturday was deserving of credit. I thought the Bo Nix, I said this on the show yesterday, I don't like Auburn, and I can't stand to get picks wrong. I liked LSU going into that game, and, Nix made me wrong. But I was entertained by what he saw. And, yeah, I still can't quite disagree with you. This Georgia defense that's playing at such a fever pitch right now, I can't disagree with you that won't continue on the Plains on Saturday. And I just find this defense to be so incredibly entertaining right now that there's really nothing I don't believe they're capable of doing.
Obviously the big play from Saturday where Nix is running around for, it seems, about 30 seconds and then finally finds Tyler Fromm for the touchdown there. He's not going to be able to do that with Adam Anderson chasing him. And I'm going to write about him at some point this week. I expect Adam Anderson to have a very impactful performance on Saturday against Auburn. He certainly did so a year ago. That was really, I think, his big coming out party of, oh, wow, this is why this guy was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. And I think his athleticism matched up against Bo Nix's athleticism, which, say whatever you want about him, Bo Nix is just a really incredible athlete. And, you look at the way, say, the New Orleans Saints used Taysom Hill at the NFL level. I wouldn't be stunned if maybe Bo Nix could potentially one day develop into that. Adam Anderson is an athlete that is capable of keeping up with and maybe even tracking down a Bo Nix.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the things that I do, and sometimes probably do to a fault, is I'm very contrarian. And I always look at whatever the common opinion is, and my instinct is to say, well, things are actually different than that or more complicated than that or the opposite of that. I see the world from sort of a contrarian point of view. However, there are some times when it's not appropriate to be contrarian. And one of the things that's going to be a huge problem for Auburn on Saturday is their offensive line has really struggled. They don't have great talent at that position group. They've really struggled. A guy like Tank Bigsby, who I think of as a terrific running back, his stats have suffered because of the fact that the Auburn offensive line right now is just not playing very well. That's a disaster. I mean, you do not want to be going up against this Georgia team with offensive line issues because there's just really very little you can do to mitigate against that.
Yeah, and Bo Nix is going to make some things happen. Adam Anderson is not going to bat 1,000 against Bo Nix. Bo Nix is going to be able to make some plays. And speaking a little bit more on Nix, I think the thing that impressed me most was that he came back and played as well as he did after getting benched, because as a football player, there's nothing worse than just straight out getting benched and not playing. And then actually seeing the guy that replaced you go out there and have success in TJ Finley and leading Auburn to a win over Georgia State. So for Bo Nix to display the mental toughness to come back for that, I was really impressed with.
Because his body language after the game against Georgia State was wretched.
Understandably so. There's nothing worse in football than not playing.
Yeah.
I will always defend guys who, such as Demetrius Robertson, who looked at the Georgia depth chart situation and said, I want to go play. And he's proven that so far. He is Auburn's leading receiver when he has been able to play. He did not play in that Georgia State game, and I think he's going to be someone who Auburn's going to look to maybe get the ball to in certain situations this weekend. So for Nix to come out and play that well, I think says a lot about him. I was certainly wrong about him. But this coming Saturday, I just think this Georgia defense is such a bad matchup because they actually have the athletes that are able, specifically Adam Anderson, I think, to keep up with him.
All right, so let me kind of play devil's advocate on this for a moment. My biggest concern for Saturday would be, you hear the Auburn reporter saying, Kirby Smart's going to try to run the score up on Auburn. You predict the shutout. I don't have a factual way of arguing against that necessarily. But here's what my one concern would be, is that if you're Georgia, you got a tough decision to make because depending on how you handle one side of this or the other, that does open the door for the game to be close enough where something happens. Georgia either tries to be conservative around Bennett again, the way that it did on Saturday. Maybe that doesn't work quite as well. Because, listen, I saw some things from Auburn up front and defensively on Saturday I was pretty impressed with. I guess the status of Owen Popo we don't quite know right now. But this front seven showed itself capable of doing some things for Auburn Saturday. Probably played even better than I assumed that they probably would. But so there's a way that you try to replicate the conservative game plan of Saturday against Arkansas, and all of a sudden now the Auburn game's a little closer than you want it to be because you're not scoring enough points. But then there's also the thing of, hey, let's let Bennett go out there and try to make some plays. And Bennett, listen, I like Stetson Bennett a lot. I've defended Bennett against a lot of Georgia fans now going on 2 years. I am a big Stetson Bennett fan, but even I will acknowledge he is reckless with the football. He's reckless with the football.
He's not a game manager.
He is not a game manager. He's reckless. He made at least one reckless throw on Saturday. And I'm saying this as a guy who likes Stetson Bennett. He is, oh boy, he makes some throws that sometimes your heart skips a beat over. So it's that decision right there that has the potential to make Saturday's game a little closer than certainly Georgia fans wanted to be. Experts believe it will be. You go conservative, now you're not scoring enough points because Auburn just has a better defensive personnel on the field than what Arkansas has. Or you try to make some plays, and Bennett, in his desire to make those plays, gives Auburn the turnover that has the potential to change the game. That's where this game gets close.
Yeah, I think I'd be very, very surprised if Auburn came out and used the same plan that Arkansas tried to,
right.
where for, I think, really a quarter and a half, Arkansas didn't think that Georgia was going to be able to run the ball, and then they did. And eventually they made some adjustments and changed the game up that way. I think Auburn is going to maybe do what UAB did, maybe with a little bit better success of just dare Stetson Bennett to beat them down the field. I will say, when it comes to Auburn and their defensive front seven, 2 weeks ago, when Arkansas beat A&M, a lot of people were, this Arkansas team, and certainly when the national media, I think, really jumped on when Stetson Bennett was starting, there were a lot of people that were like, maybe Arkansas might win this game. I thought it was more about Texas A&M not being good, and I think we've sort of seen that been proven since then. Part of me wonders, with the Auburn success on this past Saturday, if that's not more of an indictment about where LSU is right now.
I think Jordan-Hare Stadium is a very interesting factor in this game on Saturday because I have great respect for the venue. It's a hard place to play.
It's my favorite stadium in the SEC.
2017, you just got to give them credit. Now, they did a bunch of cheap, Auburn stuff with the Nick Fairley, classless. Just you can't even say enough about it in terms of the way they celebrated what was essentially dirty play from the 2013 game. But nonetheless, they created a big time atmosphere there that day. In 2019,
that game got tight.
It got tight late.
I
remember thinking, when Georgia has that couple touchdown lead, the stadium is quiet as a mouse. And then suddenly Auburn makes a couple plays, and all of a sudden they're swag surfing, and everybody's having a good time. And all of a sudden, in the late stages of that 2019 game, you had to deal with the Auburn crowd. On Saturday, this is a fan base, I'm talking about Auburn here for a moment, that is so ready to turn their own team. Like the game against LSU does not do as much to change that, I think, as some people might assume that it would. This is an Auburn fan base that wants to vote with their bodies. They want to leave the stadium. They want to boo. They want to do whatever. But they're also front runners, and if they feel like they're playing well, then they'll start cheering. I think Georgia's got to throw the kitchen sink at them in the first quarter. It's one of those things that, if you're live betting a game like this, if it's not blowout early, then you wonder, is it going to be close late? You know what I'm saying? It's like, I think this stadium can be a factor on Saturday, but Georgia can remove that early by really throwing that kitchen sink early in the game. So if Bennett's got some big throws, if you know that you've got a few things you can do it in the first quarter. Because if you build that early lead, these Auburn people will turn on their own team. They are this close to wanting to do that.
Do you know what the margin is in the first quarter of Georgia's games this year?
I think you told me this. I don't remember what you said, but I know it's a lot.
Is 91-6.
There you go.
91-6.
Yeah, that's the
this Georgia
recipe.
team has started fast. I think that's a credit to Todd Monken. If you want to just enjoy yourself as a Georgia fan, just go back and rewatch some of the games that Georgia has played so far, and try and pay attention to the stuff Georgia's doing on offense. I think Todd Monken, even with the quarterback issues and the wide receiver health where it has been this season, I think he's done a fabulous job of designing plays, and I think you've seen that's why Georgia has come out and started fast so many times. And I do agree with you. I think if this Georgia team comes out and starts fast on Saturday, it might be pretty unfun for Auburn fans there.
Yeah, that could be a really good thing to be able to see. Let's do one more thing here while we have a second. It's our Kroger Fresh Take here with Connor Riley here today. Of course, always great, so good to have him with us, and so good to let you know as well. You want a great place to work? Kroger is that place, and they're hiring right now at all stores. Now, this is one of the great things about working at Kroger is the incredible collection of benefits and associate discount type things that you get. You get next day pay for full and part-time positions. Also, all kinds of really, truly endless opportunities to advance there with our friends there at Kroger. You can apply in store, or you can also go to jobs.kroger.com for more details on that. That's jobs.kroger.com for a lot more details on that. So we talked about the idea of, kind of rat poison before, and Georgia's hearing a lot of it right now. Georgia's now, along with Alabama, I believe they're both 7-5 to win the national championship. The next closest team right now is either 12 or 14-1. Georgia way out in front. Georgia's closing the gap on Alabama when it comes to AP poll votes to be the nation's number one team here at the moment. Pretty much every national writer who's weighed in on this is essentially, other than, I guess, Danny Cannell, but everybody else has kind of echoed it's Georgia and Alabama, and then there's a chasm between everybody else. What do you make about the chatter around Georgia here right now?
First of all, it's poison. Not rat poison.
It's just poison.
It's just poison.
Yeah, I like how Connor has truncated our headline there on our
poison.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, I understand the concern, and it's college football where anything can happen. And I'll actually say I watched that Iowa-Maryland game on Friday night. Boy, Iowa, that's not a fun team to play against.
Yeah.
They do a lot of things that I think are similar to what Georgia is doing. And not to tip my hand here a little bit, but I like Iowa this week against Penn State there.
No, I could see that. I could definitely see that.
But this Georgia defense is just – it's so dominant. And I'll say with Alabama – their running back depth is starting to get a little perilous because Jace McClellan's out for the year. Trey Sanders is still sort of battling injuries and trying to figure out where he is at his point in his career. They gave Brian Robinson 36 carries in that game against Ole Miss on Saturday, and those carries, as Kerryon Johnson and this Auburn program know very well, those carries get to you at the end of the year, and if he goes down, boy, that puts Alabama in a tough spot with what they want to try and do offensively there. So, it goes to kind of show, while you could be riding high one week, you're a couple injuries away, and Georgia certainly knows this with what they've had to deal with this year from, hey, maybe Iowa's able to come in and do some things and knock you around and beat you, or, Ohio State, who I could very well see winning the Big Ten after all of this, being able to figure some more things out offensively and do enough patchwork on defense to make things interesting. I ultimately don't believe that, and I don't trust Oklahoma as a team yet. Win a game by double digits at some point this season against a Power 5 team, and I'll take you seriously.
Sure.
So part of it is, yes, Alabama and Georgia have looked that legitimately great, but the other part of it is those other teams, Oregon, Ohio State, Oklahoma. There's not an ACC team worth mentioning unless you want to talk Wake football. They just have so many glaring flaws that I understand why there are concerns for Alabama and Georgia in taking in too much poison. But I just, watching what I've seen through 5 weeks so far, there's just a massive gap between the way that Georgia and Alabama are executing and the way the rest of the sport is.
Yeah, I think you're making a pretty good point. And while I have said, hey, if I had a vote, I'd give to Georgia over Alabama, the truth is I'm actually less interested in the comparison between Georgia to Alabama and a lot more interested in the comparison between Georgia and everybody else. Because if the gap really is as significant between these two SEC teams and everybody else, then that for me has to matter come December. We're making the college football playoff picks. Because here's the thing, to me, and I realize fairness is the last thing the committee cares about. They've proven that over and over again. But here's what would be fair. Either Georgia and Alabama are both going to make the college football playoff, or we're going to agree that only the winner is going to make it. Because right now, it seems like it'd be very easy to head to a scenario where if Georgia beats Alabama, Alabama still gets in. But if Alabama beats Georgia, somehow Georgia gets excluded. Because Alabama's won national championships and been a fixture and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who say, well, that's the way it should be because Alabama's proven a lot more than Georgia has. But honestly, if you're looking at the year in the universe that we're in right now, I don't quite know how that's fair. And, it's like all the stuff that we say, going into December somehow magically gets forgotten once we get there in that moment. And there's this, political maneuvering to get other teams in the college football playoff. There's a lot Georgia's got to do to even be in this position. But I think that this is one of those things, if you care about Georgia and if you're kind of a Georgia partisan like we are, or like I am, I think that amplifying this discussion right now, that in the moment these games are being played, there is universal belief that Georgia is way better than everybody else. And so if Georgia were to lose 35-28 to Alabama in the SEC championship game, then the fact that we spent the entirety of the fall thinking Georgia was still way better than everybody else, that has got to matter, because at the time, recency bias is going to kick in. There will be people talking about the Big Ten champion and the Big 12 champion, and all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier to elbow out the loser of that SEC championship game, especially if it would be a Georgia, knowing that Georgia's not as well credentialed as Alabama is during the playoff era.
Can I point you to a scenario that you're going to hate?
Sure.
Let's say Alabama beats Georgia. Conceivable, certainly.
They would be a favorite on a neutral field right now. They'd be about a touchdown favorite.
Really, touchdown. I'd say that's probably closer to 4 or 5.5 points.
Something like that. Let's say in between 5 and 6.5.
Let's say there's a 12-0 Cincinnati. What's your outrage factor if they put a 12-0 Cincinnati over a one-loss Georgia team in the playoff?
I would be beyond outrage. Because
and I've been someone that's argued that, hey, we need to get group of 5 teams in. But if Georgia's 12-0 and their only loss is to Alabama, why are we punishing Georgia because they play in a tougher conference? If Georgia got to play the schedule that Oklahoma got to play, there'd be no question about it. But if you're going to punish Georgia and you're going to punish the second SEC team, whoever loses that game is going to be the second best SEC team and also the second best team in the country. And if you're going to punish them because they happen to play in the conference with tougher teams, what are we doing?
Yeah. So, and I don't think they're going to put Cincinnati in the playoff. I really don't. And I think that we'll see when the first rankings come out, later on, that Cincinnati is nowhere nearly as highly ranked by the committee as they are ranked by the human polls, because they just don't want a group of 5 team in the playoff unless they just politically can't afford not to. They just don't want to do it. So here's my only point. We'll kind of finish this, because to a certain person, they listen to this and they say, well, this is just way down the line. I want to amplify this conversation now so it seems relevant, not because I'm conceding a loss to Alabama, because I'm not. But we know that Georgia will be treated differently if it loses the SEC championship game, because it was in 2018. Alabama didn't even make the game in 2017 and moonwalked into the playoff. Georgia fought hard in 2018, got excluded. We have reason to believe they'll treat Alabama differently than Georgia. So let's amplify now the discussion that when the games are being played, people are blown away by what Georgia's doing, and they're frankly underwhelmed by almost everybody else.
If what we've seen in the first 5 weeks of the season continues, where Georgia continues to play as well as it does, and the rest of the sport, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, if you want to throw them in there, though their quarterback is not good enough, in my opinion, to get them. I mean, they beat Stanford, but Stanford, the only play they were running at the end of the game was goal line fade.
Right.
And they won. If that continues, there's no conceivable way you can leave Georgia out, even if they lose to Alabama. Even if they get blown out somehow by Alabama. There's just no way that can happen, in my opinion.
Yes, sir. We're going to be watching this very, very close, because I do believe it's going to be an intense college football playoff debate. It always is, but Georgia's seemingly going to be right in the middle of all that. Connor, great stuff as part of our Kroger Fresh Take today. We'll look forward to reading you at DawgNation.com. You got your own show returning tonight back to the DawgNation video channels, and we'll enjoy a chance to catch up with you as a part of that there, too.
Yep. College football playoff rankings come out next week, by the way. So thanks for having me on, BA.
Yeah, fun.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, really good stuff. We'll get to our SEC Through here coming up in a moment. I also remind you of this, that, clearly on this show we talk sports, we talk college football, but we're also really proud. I'm a Georgian, right? I live in the state of Georgia, and there's nothing that makes me more proud than the impact the University of Georgia is having on our great state, and the way that the University of Georgia also represents the state across the world, as UGA becomes really known more and more each and every year for its outstanding research and just the incredible academic achievements that are coming out of this university. And obviously a lot of you very proud of that there as well. And you really put your money where your mouth is. You support the University of Georgia. You support the UGA Alumni Association. And we always on this show, take that pretty seriously. And you'll hear us from time to time really make a call out to get involved in the UGA Alumni Association and support the work they're doing. This time of year, though, it's even more fun. I love this. There's a really great, good-natured, fun-natured competition going on right now between the University of Georgia and Auburn, the Deep South's oldest rivalry, where both alumni associations are looking to raise money right now, and they're basically competing to see who can get the most donors during what's being known as Beat Week. As Georgia tries to beat Auburn, Auburn tries to beat UGA, and this is your chance to get involved. If you love what UGA is doing, if you believe in the way that it's kind of bringing up that next generation of Georgia grads who go out and impact the world in so many different ways, then this is a great time to support the UGA Athletic Association, or I should say the UGA Alumni Association. Let me make sure I say that correctly. It's the UGA Alumni Association. So if you go to the top of the page there at DawgNation.com, you can see the link for this right now, and you can click in there. There's a great scoreboard of how many folks from Georgia have given, how many folks from Auburn have given, and then you can click right there to give your donation to the University of Georgia and the Alumni Association. You can support Just show support for UGA as UGA continues to do so many things to support our great state of Georgia. So do that right now. Let's take down Auburn as part of Beat Week as these two alumni associations square off. DawgNation.com, right there at the top of the page for a lot more on that. All right, let's turn our attention down to the SEC through. Told you before, there is a lot of heat coming the way of some of these coaches that lost on Saturday. And it was very easy to foresee a lot of this happening. That when you go into that day, it's kind of one of those first showdown Saturdays of the year. And the great thing about the SEC is somebody's got to lose, right? It's a zero-sum game. And, somebody's happy, somebody else is unhappy. And it's amazing how much heat right now Dan Mullen's taking at Florida, Ed Orgeron's taking at LSU. I'll deal with the Mullen part of this first. Mullen was asked yesterday directly about something that a lot of you had kind of pointed out, that when Mullen's jogging out to the field to shake Mark Stoops' hand on Saturday, he kind of has the smile on his face. And to me, this is not Mullen not caring about the loss. I don't think that's what it is. Mullen is just an awkward guy. He's just not natural. He's not comfortable. And he was kind of grilled about the fact that, as one reporter put it, that he's kind of stuck in that kind of New Year's Six bowl level. They've been top 10 team 2018, 2019, going into the bowl season of 2020, but they can't really seem to break through and all that. And then Mullen's response was, well, won the SEC East last year. Here's one thing you can say about Kirby Smart. Like, Kirby Smart got testy with reporters on Saturday, and I guess a little bit yesterday during the press conference too. When Smart is combative, and you can go back and check this for yourself, when Smart is combative, he's almost always combative when his team is playing well. Like, when Smart, has things going for him, then I think he feels, the freedom to just kind of say whatever he wants to in a press conference. But in those rare moments when things have not gone well for Georgia, you don't hear a lot of, pushback from Smart. He kind of takes his medicine, right? I mean, I think you'd actually be somewhat surprised to go back and listen to post-game press conferences in which Smart has lost games. He's fairly contrite, and he does not get real pushy with the reporters on questions. He sort of answers them, and I think that's actually kind of a good look, right? It's like you don't want to be caught arguing too much for your own cause at a time in which the evidence doesn't really support that. You just don't want to quite do that. And Mullen seems to be a little too quick to come to his own defense in a moment when his actions on the field don't quite do that. And, the atmosphere around Florida locally, in Gainesville, around that program, has in recent years been just a little bit different than the national media perception has kind of been. Dan Mullen gets all this praise for being the best play caller in college football, but for a lot of Florida fans, they also point out the fact that they're not super happy with some of the assistants that he's hired, the way in which the recruiting tentacles have spread out through the state of Florida, the fact that he brought back Todd Grantham for 2021, even though there were horrible defensive failures at the end of last season. Florida fans are not as robustly happy with Dan Mullen as you might assume. Now, if they're going back and forth with a Georgia fan or a rival fan base, then like a lot of teams do, they'll defend their own coach there in that regard. But you see, after a day like Saturday and a loss to Kentucky, a second now loss of the season for the Gators, you kind of see how thin the support for Mullen is at Florida. It may be a mile wide, but it's about an inch deep. And you kind of saw an example of that, to say nothing of what's happening at LSU right now, where I think the thing around Orgeron, at least from my perspective, and I'm a few hundred miles away here, but from my perspective, it seems like this is a pretty well media-driven phenomenon. I can't quite tell how LSU fans truly feel about this. LSU fans are a little hard to find sometimes. There are a lot of them, but they're just a different breed, right? They're still tailgating from Saturday probably. It's like sometimes it's sort of hard to put your finger on the pulse of exactly what LSU fans think. But there are a lot of media types around there that are really grilling Orgeron pretty hard. And now he's lost again. And look at that schedule that's upcoming for LSU. They got Kentucky. I mean, it does not get easier sooner. In fact, let me see if I can talk and pull this up really quick. This is the rest of the LSU schedule for the next few weeks. Listen to this for a moment. So they're at Kentucky on Saturday. Then it's Florida on October 16th. It's at Ole Miss for the the Magnolia Bowl on October 23rd. Week off, then it's Alabama November 6th, Arkansas November 13th, and they have to play Texas A&M on November 27th. LSU has got a really tough schedule coming up, and it would seem on the basis of what we've seen thus far from LSU against Auburn, against UCLA, they got more losses to come. I mean, I said a lot during the offseason that I did not think Orgeron was Gene Chizik. I did not think he was going to be one of these guys that won a national championship and fizzled out 2 years later. I can't say that I know for sure right now. And I saw where Stuart Mandel, the athletic writer, the other day was like, it's weird at LSU because in the past, if something like this were to happen, then LSU fans would be calling for Jimbo Fisher, and maybe now it's not as easy to hire Jimbo Fisher because he's making so much money at Texas A&M. A&M's losing games right now, too. There is an obvious replacement for Ed Orgeron at LSU. I mean, to me, the guy you go get's the offensive coordinator of the Carolina Panthers. You go get Joe Brady. I think most people would say that Sam Darnold's a different quarterback playing with Brady than he was at any point in time in his career before this. I just think Brady's a very, very sharp guy, and like to this day, I still don't know much about him. I'm not even sure I could pick him out of a lineup. I don't really know what he looks like. But he was the best play-calling mind I've ever seen in the SEC when he was passing game coordinator there at LSU in 2019. He was the guy that was most responsible, I believe, for that national championship. So if it's Orgeron that doesn't work, the easiest hire may no longer be Jimbo Fisher, the former offensive coordinator at LSU. It may be their more recent passing game coordinator, a guy like Brady, who, if he doesn't take the LSU job, I would think is on his way to becoming an NFL head coach at some point in time there too. So interesting times on the Bayou. There was a video that leaked out and I told you I'd take some medicine for my Texas A&M stuff. Talked them up a lot during the offseason. Did not pick them to win the SEC West, and it was their offensive failures that held me back from doing that. And on that particular part of this prediction, turned out I was probably right about that. Starting quarterback exasperates that even more, but clearly I didn't see them losing 2 games as quickly this season as they had, nor would I've ever seen them losing to a team in Mississippi State, which I think of as the worst team in the SEC, but that's what happened for the Aggies on Saturday. And there was a video that leaked out of the game day crew kind of talking about the atmosphere there at College Station and the fact that over the years, A&M has just lost a ton of games at Kyle Field. I mean, they've just lost a ton of games. And I guess there's this thought that the 12th man, the way they kind of make noise, where it's like this like sort of constant dull roar, yell, but not the kind of natural rhythm of crescendoing for really good moments and really special moments, that A&M is just actually kind of an easy stadium to play in, and the results on the field would prove that. I mean, it is regroup time for Texas A&M in a big way. I think the long-term projection for that program is still probably pretty good. They are recruiting very well. I think that Jimbo Fisher is building a solid program, but they are not dynamic offensively. And if King, the quarterback, was still healthy and playing, would they be in better shape? Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But this is, I mean, I think when you make a list of the most disappointing teams in the SEC right now, you got to clearly say Texas A&M's at the top of that. There are other teams that you would include on that list too. But a real problem for for A&M right now. Let me also squeeze this because I skipped a story I meant to do a moment ago. So I was impressed by Tennessee on Saturday. Now, on the list of disappointing teams, you got to include Missouri there. They got absolutely just blasted, in Como on Saturday after losing at Boston College the week before that. This is a team that I thought was going to have a lot more fight in it than it's proven to have thus far this season. But also, Tennessee I thought was one of the easiest underplays to begin the year. Their season win total was only at 6, and I thought they were very easy to go under that. This is not the kind of game I would have ever imagined them winning. They did so by scoring a lot of points and really, flexing a little bit there at Missouri on Saturday. Very, very impressive stuff there. And Kirk Herbstreit's been out there online kind of praising Tennessee and Josh Heupel there a little bit. I don't think this changes my overall feeling about Tennessee. I still think this is a bad football team. I think they've got more losses to come. But this was a pretty impressive day on Saturday for the Vols. I think you got to give them a little bit of credit for that. We'll make that your SEC through. And speaking of giving some credit, I love to give credit to my friends at Classic City Lager from Creature Comforts Brewing Company because it is a craft-style lager that just tastes great. It's as we say around here all the time, it's just good, cold beer. It's a lighter style beer, but there's no sacrifice on flavor. The folks that do all those great brews from Creature Comforts, all those craft selections, they have worked very hard to make Classic City Lager just as good as any of that. If you're in the mood for kind of that lighter lager style beer, I can promise you Classic City Lager is going to go great for you. It's a taste of Athens. It reminds me of being Athens every time I hold one of those cans in my hand. The good news is you don't have to be in Athens to get it, though. Wherever you're doing your shopping, you can find Classic City Lager from Creature Comforts Brewing Company. I always like watching this video when we show that for those who are watching on video because you see the great brewery and those cans coming off the belt there. I've been in that facility. I've seen them make that. It's just a really fun thing to be able to do. It's great to get to know the folks there and the great care they take to be good citizens in the community in Athens, but also a big part of the craft beer scene across our country. They take that very seriously. They love what they do. It's a labor of love, a real passion project for them. And so Classic City Lager, another example of that. So make sure you check out some today. All right, we got a good crop of golden shoe submissions. Let's run through those right now. We'll show the first one from our buddy Mad Dog here, who has a great edit of Dan Mullen kind of falling down the ladder, which is labeled as the AP poll. Mike the Mad Dog says, when you lose on the road to an unranked team, and yeah, Gators clearly kind of getting toppled there in that Associated Press poll. Mad Dog, really good stuff. Will make you a golden shoe winner for today. Let's show you the next one here, too, just for a moment. Frank Palumbo had a good idea. Kentucky got a huge fine for having their fans rush the field there at Commonwealth Stadium and Kroger Field for, I guess, the third time. He says maybe we should start a GoFundMe for Kentucky. Gator hating is in our hearts and in our wallets. We can even get a novelty check and make a new office prop with the final total raise. I like everything Frank is saying here on this. We may have to look into that, Frank. That's a really good idea. We have to check that out. By the way, John Smitty4492 on the subject of Facebook's outage yesterday says it got shut down by Georgia's D, and in a lot of ways, maybe it truly did. Good stuff. John will make you a golden shoe winner as well. And speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, 25 days from right now, Dogs get some revenge in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, where you can turn to R.S. Andrews for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. And are you guys with me on this when I say it's time to bring back HBTFD against Auburn on Saturday? A chance to go back out there and remind yourself how much this game matters to Kirby Smart, how worried Auburn fans are apparently about the blowout possibility for Saturday. Georgia having that edge about them as they go into all that on Saturday. I think all that's a really good thing to remind ourselves of. And the prop will be here this week to remind us that Georgia's got some business to take care of, and Auburn knows what's coming to them. All right, let's go to Facebook here. We'll get a few comments there. We'll do YouTube. We'll go back to DawgNation.com. But I want to start on Facebook because for a while there yesterday, I wondered if we would never get a chance to speak on Facebook to anybody else ever again. I don't know anything about this kind of stuff, but some of those like gamer geek type people were talking about how whatever happened to Facebook was really pretty serious to the point where like the site was essentially deleted yesterday, and they got it back somehow. So there you go. Philip Jordan Wells says there's a big SEC game Saturday. Don't forget about that in Dallas between Oklahoma and Texas. It's kind of fun to think about that. I guess in the next couple of years, that Red River Shootout will be an SEC game. Pretty wild to even think about that. I like this. Mark Godfrey says, throw it. I would throw it, but I'm afraid what it'll hit in my studio might break something. Joel Moody says, Dog's going to treat Auburn like a candle and blow them out. I like that. But Matt Rugavina says that another phrase that Kirby doesn't necessarily like to use, but maybe out for payback against Florida. Oh, boy. If Auburn's worried about the extra edge from Georgia right now, how worried should Florida be? I would say probably pretty worried on all of that all the way around. Matt Rugavina says, with everyone losing each week and falling out of the top 25, UJ's chances of us being a second SEC team in the playoff go up. It does, but see, this is the problem. Like ESPN does this thing of like percentage chance of making the playoff, and the problem is like that doesn't fully account for the human part of this. And I do truly believe that the committee itself is a big part of all of this. And listen, I understand the idea that you don't want to be college football. You don't want college football to be what, like, say, hockey is. Hockey is a very regional sport. People in the very far north care about it, and, the farther south you get, the less likely people are to care about hockey, and that's bad for business. Like, you don't want to – I understand why the caretakers of this sport don't want college football to necessarily be like that, where, people only care about college football in kind of the Sun Belt region, and the farther north you get or the farther west you get, the less likely you are to have people who kind of pay attention. I get why that's bad for business, but at a certain point in time, do you care about the competitive balance at all? Do you care about doing what's right on the field at all? Because it becomes very easy to just argue for whatever. I mean, remember, we had ESPN people before the season began with a straight face saying that the league that had the best chance of getting two playoff teams was the Big 12. Do you remember how much we laughed about that with I think it was Heather Dinich making such a convoluted case for Iowa State being a surefire playoff team? We rolled our eyes at that, so that was the most ludicrous thing we've heard. Pretty clearly that's been proven correct. We've barely even gotten to October. Our point of view on that has been. So, I mean, like, it is not inconceivable that ESPN will just sort of argue for whatever they want to be true in the midst of all this. That's why it's more important now to point out the difference between Georgia and everybody else. The difference between Georgia and Alabama will work itself out at some point in time. And frankly, even though I would rank Georgia number one, I'm sort of fine with somebody who says, hey, Georgia doesn't get to be ranked ahead of Alabama until it beats Alabama. Gosh knows in 2015, being favored against Alabama, which Georgia was that day, that didn't work out very well. So I'm sort of fine if you want to keep Alabama ranked ahead of Georgia for right now. But it's the comparison between Georgia and everybody else. This is what matters. You want to – this is why – and I know Clemson's kind of turned out to be a little bit of a dumpster fire since then, but this is why beating Clemson week one was a big deal. You want to start making your case for playoff status regardless of what happens in the SEC championship game. And you want to argue that case because if somebody like me who does the Georgia show, if I'm not going to argue that case, then who is, right? I mean, at some point in time, at a certain point – it's kind of up to those of us who care about this to kind of, make our own argument for that. And you better believe around here we're going to. All right, whatever else. Phil Rogers wants a DawgNation invasion of Jacksonville. I don't know that there's going to be an official invasion this year, just to be completely honest, but there will be certainly an unofficial invasion taking place for sure. Daniel Aldridge says, I still believe that Georgia's the better team. I believe that's in comparison to Alabama, and there's a very good chance we find that out. Kevin Flute says Auburn, Florida, Georgia Tech, or maybe that's Flutie. If I mispronounce it, I apologize. He says those games are going to be pure beatdown. Sorry, not sorry. I believe he might be right. Wade Walford says Auburn's going to get a dose of Stetson Bennett 2 years in a row. Yeah, Bennett played great against Auburn last year. That's really true. Marcus Chafin coming hard on Auburn there too. I love to see that. Yeah, you can really tell we're in a rivalry week situation because everybody's got that little extra edge to them this week. You can really tell that, and I very much enjoy that. I very much enjoy that. All right, let's see what else. Over here on YouTube. Jay Shipe says the SEC game should not be an elimination game. So here's the thing. As I told Connor, I just think that whatever it is, you have to agree to it beforehand. Because on the one hand, I mean, if you could eliminate Alabama in December and not have to beat them twice, you'd want to do that, right? So whatever's true for Georgia ought to also be true for Alabama. Like, it shouldn't be one of these things where Alabama only has to beat Georgia once, but Georgia has to beat Alabama twice. Like, that's not fair. And I realize that nobody is trying to make it fair. I realize that fairness is the farthest thing from anybody's mind. But I just think it's one of those things where you got to agree to it going in. Either it's we're going to play the national championship in December and then work backwards with the college football playoff, or we're going to play this game now for seeding and then both these teams go to the college football playoff. That's the conversation I want to have. Are we treating this where both teams know they're about to eliminate the other one? Because if that's the case, then let's do it, right? You'll have all, you'll have short time to get ready for the game, but Alabama's doing the same kind of thing. Frankly, Georgia's only have to get ready for Georgia Tech. Alabama's getting ready for Auburn, so maybe that's a slight advantage for UGA there. But if December is the elimination game between Alabama and Georgia, then let's play it in December. If it's but it can't be one of these things. Well, we've seen Alabama do all this stuff over the years. We hadn't really seen Georgia do that, so therefore Georgia ekes by and wins against Alabama, and now they got to do it twice. But Alabama beats Georgia, and all of a sudden now we're arguing for Cincinnati or Oklahoma or Iowa or whoever else. That's where that gets a little bit unfair, I believe. Jacob Phillips says, what does Auburn do on offense versus UGA? Run, throw, or more backyard football from Bo Nix? I do believe what Connor said on the show a moment ago is true. I don't believe that Bo Nix, as entertained as I was by what he did against LSU, you are not going to run around and do that, that hero ball thing against Georgia. You're just going to get knocked in the middle of next week if you try to do that against Georgia. Here's the one thing I'd love to have somebody smarter than me tell me. Is there a way to max protect against Georgia and just try to swing for the fences? Because I don't really know that you saw that very much from Arkansas on Saturday for whatever reason. But that's the one thing I guess I'd be somewhat curious of. is there that max protection opportunity where you create, even if it's a very easily telegraphed route, Georgia knows where the ball's going, it's still kind of a one-on-one situation that you're just going to try to exploit. Now, you may say with Auburn, do they even have really the receivers to do that? And that's obviously one of the weakest areas on that roster, our buddy D-Rob notwithstanding. But that's like the one thing I'd be curious to see because, as I said before, the Auburn offensive line has really struggled this year. And you think, well, it's going to be a heavy dose of Tank Bigsby on Saturday. Bigsby's just not really had a great season for them. So I think that you've got to try to hit those big shot plays. And, can you create that 2 tight end set, running back, trying to chip somebody? Can you really put, 8 guys into a blocking situation so that you have a chance to hit the deep strike? That's, I guess, what I'd be kind of wondering. Johnny Lester says Nolan Smith is a beast, and he is. Jim McLaughlin says Bo Nix better work on his scrambling, and yeah, it's a tough team to scramble against. D-Man 430 says, yes, BA, you got to get the ball out quickly, though. 3 seconds or less each play. I think our secondary could be challenged by a good receiver group. Yeah, and Auburn's obviously not quite that. Georgia, like what Florida has at receiver with Copeland and some of those guys, that's clearly better than what Auburn has. But can you create that opportunity where, because here's what we don't know. Like, is Georgia now getting better in its secondary? We don't know because nobody ever has time to throw. But, you've seen now this group play a couple more weeks, and they've had 2 more rigorous weeks of practice. I mean, by the time somebody actually finally blocks Georgia, they may find out, well, gosh, the secondary is not what it was week 2 anymore. All of a sudden, that group that had some issues, all of a sudden now they've been working and getting better because Georgia gets to practice as well. Georgia gets to work on some of these issues that it's trying to work on. But if I'm thinking about the reason why the Georgia-Auburn game may end up being, there's a part of me that's always going to want to have that thing in my mind of what could go wrong. I told you that last week. I just can't quite escape that. There's the part of me that's always going to want to know if things on Saturday don't go the way that I want them to, or if they're closer than they're supposed to be, where does that come from? And I think it really comes down to something offensively makes the game closer, where all of a sudden you've got to make a play. Because for as down as Georgia defense has been, we haven't seen them week 1 in a scenario where they have to make a play to win the game. Right now against Clemson, they could have gone on making plays all night. But, do you see them back in a scenario again on Saturday where they have to make the play to win the game? And if you either, turn Bennett loose and he turns the ball over, or you try to protect your backup quarterback and you're just not scoring enough points, if those things were to happen on Saturday, then suddenly now the crowd's involved. Now a mistake by Georgia is inflated. The importance of that's inflated. So if you want to have the negative conversation, that's where my negativity creeps in, is does something occur offensively that allows the game to be closer, allows those Auburn fans to believe they have a chance, and does it turn into one of those 60-minute type games? Jay Shipes going in on Jimbo Fisher. Jay, I'm going to take this from a lot of people. I said yesterday, if people want to give me grief on whatever, but you can't be the one to do it because, concurrent to you talking down Jimbo, which you did, I'll give you credit for that, you did, you're also talking up Lane Kiffin every day of the week. And I don't know if you noticed this, but it's not exactly the greatest week to be Lane Kiffin either right now. Wyatt Fielden says, who would you pick for the MVP this weekend for Georgia and Auburn? That's a really good question. It's hard to go away from somebody on the defensive line, right? It's hard to go away from, the Davises, the Devontae Wyatts, that group, because, one of the things that Kirby Smart always says, and this really is true, is that everything that Georgia does defensively seems to flow out of its ability to stop the run. That Georgia kind of cuts the head off the snake of its opponent by stopping the run, and then proceeds to get aggressive in pass rush, which now turns a beatdown into a dominant beatdown, right? But it's what those guys do to prevent those easy yards up the middle. And when you kind of force that team to now be one-dimensional, or force that team to now they have to try the outside edge. Now you're inviting guys like Nakobe Dean and Adam Anderson to chase you down. It's that taking away of the middle. I mean, I remember this. I mean, I hate to invoke this name as a football conversation, but when Paul Johnson was at Georgia Tech, when he was running that triple option thing, like the one thing that I remember him saying was the first thing they were going to try to do is that fullback dive. They were always going to check that fullback dive, or I guess they would call it a B-back, I think. They were always going to try that to see if it worked, right? They wanted to test a team up the middle defensively. And, how that battle went was going to determine so much what the rest of the game was like. And I think all football is like that to a certain extent, that if it's soft in the middle, then everything gets easier. But if it's impenetrable in the middle, then everything gets hard, bordering on impossible. And so Georgia's MVPs will always kind of be the Wyatts and the Davises and the Jalen Carters and those guys who don't allow anything on the inside. Because as Kirby's kind of alluded to, there are more and more teams playing a lot more players in pass coverage. And a lot of this started in the Big 12, right? I think that Gary Patterson was one of the first guys to really introduce that, smaller defensive line, and more guys in pass coverage. You see a lot of high school teams now that play those two wide linebackers. Teams are just trying to defend against the spread more, right? I mean, I'm not, a coach. I'm not pretending to be an X's and O's expert, but you do just watch football. You notice this kind of thing. And I think in the SEC now, it's been regularity that you've got the 5 defensive backs on the field. Now you're seeing a lot of teams playing 6 a lot more. Arkansas did that plenty, but Arkansas also did that because that's what its personnel kind of lended it towards doing. But as Kirby's now said for a couple of weeks, there are a lot more teams that are playing a lot more defensive backs. And when Georgia wants to do that, or when it wants to send pressure, the fact that you can defend the run with like 3 dudes just makes all of that so much easier to do. So much easier to do. Jacob Phillips likes Connor Riley's take on the shutout. He says Kirby can really flex his hate on Auburn with the suffocating defense. Yeah, Kirby would love to do that. Love to do that. DMart42 has an interesting pick for UGA's MVP this week, and he says it's going to be Bo Nix. Listen, I also wouldn't be that surprised if there's not, even though Nix is riding high right now, the fact that they kind of come back with TJ Finley a little bit just to give Georgia something else to think of. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to do some of that a little bit. Ed Hustis, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. It's a very nice thing to be able to read. Frank Patterson. How about a shout-out for Dwan Mathis? Big performance for Temple and a win against Memphis. That was great to see. Boy, Memphis has had quite a year. Wally Smith says, what's your thoughts on the game? Yeah, I mean, I think it's likely to be an easy Georgia victory. I'll give Connor credit for predicting the shutout. I don't know that I would have had quite that same level of confidence, but, I've seen enough from Georgia this year to believe that it's on track to be dominant in a game like this, and I do think Auburn's got some problems. I actually was impressed with what it did against LSU this past Saturday, and frankly, if you're an Auburn fan, you're happy about that. I think you should be. But, I mean, my big takeaway on all of this, Wally, is I think it's really important that Georgia is at its best in the first quarter in this game. I think the fast start's such a big deal because I think you can take the crowd out of it. I think you can take Auburn's belief in itself out of it. Remember, this is a program that 2 weeks ago was firing an assistant coach. By the way, we haven't even talked about the fact that Missouri's fired its defensive line coach too, so we'll do that at some point in time this week. But Auburn fired its wide receivers coach. You had, quarterback replaced during the game, bad body language from Bo Nix, Auburn fans not really sure what to make of Brian Harsin. You can bring all that negativity back into the forefront for Auburn if you get off to the fast start there on Saturday. I believe that's true. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment. Randy Hall says, will Bo Jackson, the Auburn mascot, be throwing toilet paper on their commercial after this weekend? Yeah, we had our buddy Forestry Dog had a great golden shoe the other day of them doing that in the Heisman House commercial after having, won close against Georgia State. That was really pretty funny. Alan A. says, lame kitten loves popcorn. I like that. Lance Scuba Steve. I love the fact that Lance has an alias. He's Scuba Steve. Says Riverboat Bennett could allow Auburn to make a play and get the idea they can hang, keep Jordan Hare in the game. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is some risk there, but there's also risk on the other side of this too. So Lance, I agree with you. It's like the last thing you want, because, I mean, a lot of us have been in the stadium before, and a lot of us know it can get loud when they believe. The last thing you want is that turnover that allows Auburn to start, feeling like they got something going on. But the flip side of that is, what if you're not moving the football well enough? Because I said before, what Auburn did defensively on Saturday, I didn't think was too bad. And they've got better athletes defensively than what Arkansas has. Is Mason a better coordinator than Barry Odom? I'd say probably not, although he did do some nice things at Stanford. I'd say overall I probably respect Odom as a defensive mind more than I respect Mason, but they have better personnel. They just, even with all they've lost the last few years, they still have better personnel. So, you could do something really vanilla against Arkansas and you still moving the football, still scoring points. You may have to do a little bit more than that on Saturday, which means a couple of times you're going to have to ask Bennett to make the throw that is just a little bit dangerous. Now, imagine the boost you get if he makes those throws. I mean, this is why college football is so much fun, because the rewards for doing something well are, and the punishment for doing something bad is, and that's why we're just so glued to the screen for all of these moments, because it really is the agony, the ecstasy on every potential play. Randy Hall says, got to get that chortle button for the big wins. They're on the way. I think you're right about that, Randy. We're going to be moving studios here in a couple of weeks, and so for now we are pretty well zeroed in on. I mean, that's a full meal in itself. I've had endless array of, and listen, I'm very thankful for all of it, but I've had endless array of phone calls about all of that the last few weeks. So that's a pretty full meal, but a good soundboard is definitely something that's on our list after that. Jacob Yarborough says, my hatred for Auburn only intensified in 2013 when I had to watch that game with a household full of Auburn fans. I understand where Jacob's coming from on this. My theory, and I have no way of knowing if this is true, but my theory is, those house divided like license plates? I believe there are more Georgia-Auburn house divided license plates than there are any other schools. I just think the geographic proximity of these two schools, there are more divided, like Auburn husband, Georgia wife, or hopefully Georgia women aren't marrying Auburn men, but you know what I'm saying. Like, there's just more of those house divideds amongst Georgia Auburn than anything, because a lot of divided neighborhoods. I've got a lot of Auburn fans in my neighborhood. There's just a lot of us have a lot of Auburn people in our lives. So this Georgia Auburn rivalry in a lot of ways really is driven by the fact that a lot of people know Auburn fans. And it's not they don't like the people, but they don't want to hear from those people if Auburn loses. Some of the best viral clips we've seen in the last couple of years of Georgia fans rubbing it in has been to Auburn people. There's just a lot of depth to all of that. And unlike everybody else, over the course of the last decade, this rivalry went from being what used to be what Vince Dooley called feuding cousins. Let me tell you something. It ain't that anymore. This thing's pretty white hot. And the fact that it's become that way, with Georgia winning almost every one of these games, is, I think, only speaks to the intensity that the series has developed. Score Check says, I hate the barn 24/7, 365, and in 366 days on those leap years. I like that. Jay Crow says, I learned to hate Auburn before I grew to love the Dogs. I like that. I hear you. I hear you on that. Good comments. Johnny Rick says, the Chattahoochee split's a big deal here in West Georgia. New coach, same Auburn, so run it up. HBTFD. I know what you mean, Johnny. I know a lot of folks over there in that West Georgia area, that LaGrange, that Carrollton, that Columbus area. You better believe, and I hear from them because some of them, to be completely honest with you, don't love the fact that I'm such a big Gator hater. There are a lot of folks over in that West Georgia, section, allies, typically speaking, but they don't like the fact that I make such a big deal of Georgia, Florida, because they want to them, Georgia Auburn is what I say Georgia Florida is. And listen, around here we got room to hate, more than one team, but I know exactly where you're coming from. In that area over there in West Georgia, this Georgia Auburn deal is the biggest of them all, and I get that. I really do. I get that. RX Dog says, is Bully worse than the Doors? That's probably an exaggeration on my part. The worst team in the SEC is Vanderbilt. I guess what I meant to say was worst team in the SEC West, Mississippi State. That's an exaggeration. That's a misspeak on my part. Randy Hall says, what about Oscar Delp's commitment? Yeah, it's coming up very soon. Dog Nation looking forward to having coverage of that. We hope we get some good news on that front there as well. All right, quick run through the rest of the comments, and we got to go. Facebook, YouTube, and everything else. Bill Sanders says, I see more UGA Georgia Southern divided tags than anything else. Maybe that's true. Robert Moody says, my wife's an Auburn grad. She used to put a pom-pom in my face back in the day. We've owned them for so long. He says, we've owned them for so long, she doesn't even act like there's a game on. Yeah, it's always kind of a nice thing. I can only imagine what it must be like to truly be in kind of a true divided house like that. John Smith says, Mississippi State's one of the weirdest teams I've ever watched. Winning games they should lose, losing games they should win. That's a pretty good description for sure. Zinty Allen says, can we show some love to James Cook? He's on a mission this year, and I'm loving it. Yeah, Zinty, you're right. James has been great to watch this year. Miriam Martin Corbin, who I saw on Saturday, says she's going to see me again this Saturday. Miriam, I can't wait for that. Jonathan Moore says the Georgia-Auburn rivalry hasn't been as much of a factor the last couple of years. He says Georgia-Florida is going to be the biggest game each and every year, and for the most part, I think that's true. Winford Steinspring on the subject of Leonard's loser. Somebody brought that up. Yeah, I remember that when I was a kid. That was a very clever gimmick, right? You know, especially back then. You know, to pick the loser of the game, that was just kind of a good gimmick. And I was a very small child when Leonard's losers was a thing, but I do remember that for sure. Brings back a lot of memories to my family. Boy, does that bring back a lot of memories of them. Big time. Maurice Long says Auburn recruited West Georgia better than Georgia back in the day. Yeah, I mean, there was a time you could make a case that Auburn was Georgia's biggest recruiting rival. If you want to explain the trajectory of the two programs right now, nothing explains it better than the fact that Georgia and Auburn are not anywhere near the recruiting rivals they once were. Nothing explains that better than that. Derek Green says the podcast is not going to be ready on time. Yeah, we got to get ready to go. We got to get ready to go. All right, good stuff. Hey, y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. And just really appreciate you being here. Also, ajc.com as well for our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. You know, great community conversation yesterday involving some of the mayoral candidates. Really a nice way to get informed on, for those who watch our show and live in the city of Atlanta, very important decision that's going to be on the ballot here coming up in a few weeks. So a great chance to kind of check in on all of that. Also, Braves getting ready for the postseason. You can continue to follow that online at ajc.com. And a good look from our buddy Chip Towers at Dan Jackson. You can read that there as well. And aftermath of Tech's. It's about blowouts. Boy, they got just absolutely wally-mopped by Pitt on Saturday. That was quite a thing to see. Also, I guess Trae Young is hurt again, so what else is new on that front? He got hurt in a preseason game last night. I don't know how serious it is, but it feels like we've kind of been there before on all of that. So Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ajc.com for a bunch more on that. Big thanks to RS Andrews. They're the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised with the price that's promised. You can find RS Andrews online today at rsandrews.com. Also, back here tomorrow morning, 9:45 for our First and 15 on DawgNation.com and the DawgNation app. And then 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We will look forward to seeing you then, everybody. Have a great day. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.